The realtor accused me of wasting her time the moment I asked to view an $8 million estate wearing paint-stained work clothes straight off a job site. She looked me up and down in that marble lobby like I had tracked mud across something sacred. I stayed calm. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and showed her the escrow clearance letter confirming the full purchase amount already sitting ready to close. Her face went deep red in about 3 seconds flat. I built a business out of dirt and drywall dust and busted knuckles, starting with a single pickup truck and a stack of unpaid invoices that nearly buried me twice. Nobody ever mistook me for money walking into a room, grease under my nails, boots that have seen concrete, tar, and sawdust in equal measure, a face that spent 20 years under a hard hat instead of a boardroom light. That realtor took one look at those boots and decided everything about who I was in half a second, the same way half the world has judged me my entire working life. She was not the first person to make that mistake. She would not be the last. But she was the one who made it happen in front of the exact wrong crowd, on the exact wrong afternoon, with an escrow letter sitting in my pocket that could buy her entire brokerage twice over. What happened over the following weeks tore open old wounds about class, about respect, and about a business partner I trusted for over a decade who turned out to share more in common with that realtor's judgment than I ever wanted to admit. It cost me a friendship. It cost me sleep. And it forced me to figure out exactly what kind of man I wanted to be once I finally had the money to stop proving myself to anyone. Stay with me, because where this story lands is not where you think. Before we start, hit that like button. Share this with someone who has ever been judged for how they look instead of what they built. Drop a comment when you reach the part that gets you, and subscribe so you catch the next one. My name is Russell Coates, and I am 52 years old. I grew up in Muncie, Indiana, in a rented duplex on the wrong side of the train tracks that split our town in half, both literally and in every other way that mattered. My father drove a forklift at a factory warehouse for 31 years. My mother worked the register at a hardware store downtown, the same one where I later got my first job sweeping floors at age 13 for $2 an hour under the table. We did not have much, and everybody in Muncie knew exactly which side of town that meant you came from. Kids at school could tell by your shoes, by your backpack, by whether your lunch came in a paper bag or a plastic container with your name written in permanent marker, because your mother could not afford to lose one more container to a kid who never returned it. I wore hand-me-downs from 2 older cousins until I was old enough to work summers myself and buy my own clothes at the discount store on Route 32. My father believed hard work solved every problem a man could face in life. He never had much patience for excuses, and he never had much patience for people who talked more than they worked either. He taught me to fix things around our duplex before I understood algebra, showing me how to patch drywall, how to sweat a copper pipe, how to read a house's bones just by walking through it slow and paying attention. I spent my Saturdays as a kid handing him tools and learning the names of things most boys my age never thought twice about: joist and header and shim and stud. School never came easy for me. I struggled with reading, though nobody diagnosed anything back then, not in a school with 2 overworked teachers per grade and 0 budget for testing every kid who fell behind. I sat in the back of most classrooms, quiet, embarrassed, counting the minutes until I could get back to something that made sense to my hands, even when it never made sense to my head. Teachers wrote me off early. One guidance counselor told my mother in front of me that I should consider a trade school instead of wasting time on college applications, delivered with a tone that made trade school sound like a consolation prize for a kid who was never going to amount to much. I dropped out of high school at 17, 1 semester short of graduation, after my father's forklift accident put him out of work for 8 months with a shattered hip that never fully healed right. Somebody needed to bring in money fast, and I already had more construction skill in my hands than most licensed contractors twice my age. I lied about my age to get on a framing crew building tract houses on the outskirts of town, working alongside men who had spent their whole lives doing exactly what I was starting, sunup to sundown, 6 days a week, for wages that barely covered rent and groceries for our family of 4. I earned my GED 2 years later, studying at night after 12-hour shifts, mostly because my mother refused to let me quit on that piece of paper no matter how tired I was. She sat with me at our kitchen table most nights, quizzing me on math problems she barely understood herself, determined that at least one piece of paper in this world would say her son finished something the school system had already given up on. By 22, I had learned enough about framing, electrical, plumbing, and finish carpentry to run my own small crew, taking on side jobs that the bigger contractors considered too small to bother with. I bought a used pickup truck for $1,100, painted my own name on the door with a stencil kit from the hardware store where my mother still worked, and started Coates Construction with nothing but a truck, a toolbox, and a reputation I had not built yet. My first real client was a widow named Dorothy Grimes who needed her kitchen rebuilt after a pipe burst and flooded half her house. Every contractor she called quoted her double what the job should have cost, sensing an elderly woman with insurance money and no husband around to negotiate on her behalf. I quoted her fair, did the work clean and on schedule, and she told every single person at her church about the honest young man who fixed her kitchen without trying to squeeze her for every dollar her insurance would pay. That single referral chain kept my truck running for the next 3 years straight. I met my wife, Bethany, during that same stretch, a nursing student working part-time at a diner where my crew stopped for lunch most days. She had a laugh that carried across the whole restaurant, and a way of looking at a man covered in drywall dust like he was worth more attention than the suits who came in for their coffee before work. We married 2 years later, poor, exhausted most weekends, and completely certain we had found something real worth building a life around. Nobody in Muncie who knew me back then, not one single person, would have ever guessed that grease-stained kid sweeping floors at the hardware store would one day walk into an $8 million estate ready to buy it outright. Least of all me. Coates Construction grew slowly through my 20s, one honest job leading to the next, one satisfied client telling 2 more. By the time I turned 30, I had 12 men working under me, building custom additions and full home renovations across 3 counties in eastern Indiana. It was solid, steady work, the kind that let Bethany and I buy our first real house and start putting away a small amount every month towards something we did not fully name yet. The real turning point came when I was 34, through a client named Walter Prout, a soft-spoken commercial developer who hired my crew for a strip mall renovation project after every larger contractor in the region either overbid him or missed his deadlines. Walter watched me manage that job personally, watched me handle a supplier dispute and a permitting delay without losing my composure or my schedule. And at the final walkthrough, he made me an offer that changed the entire trajectory of my career. "You've got something most contractors your age never develop," Walter told me, standing in the freshly finished parking lot. "You solve problems instead of making excuses for them. I've got 3 more commercial projects lined up over the next 2 years. I want you handling all of them, and I want to talk about a bigger partnership after that if things go the way I think they will." I said yes before he finished the sentence. The next decade transformed Coates Construction from a residential renovation outfit into a legitimate commercial general contracting firm, handling strip malls, office buildings, and eventually mid-sized apartment complexes across central Indiana. Walter became more than a client. He became a mentor and eventually a genuine friend, teaching me the business side of construction that no framing crew ever exposed me to. Financing structures, bonding requirements, how to read a commercial lease agreement well enough to protect my own interests when negotiating with property owners who assumed a contractor's word meant nothing once ink hit paper. I brought on a business partner during that stretch too, a sharp, ambitious man named Craig Denton, who handled our estimating and client relationships while I ran field operations. Craig had a business degree and a polish I never developed myself, comfortable in boardrooms in a way that still made me sweat through my collar even after years of practice. We complemented each other well for a long time, Craig closing deals with his easy confidence, me delivering on every promise he made because my crews never missed a deadline or cut a corner clients would regret later. By the time I turned 45, Coates Construction employed over 200 people across 4 Indiana counties, with annual revenue that would have seemed impossible to the kid sweeping floors at his mother's hardware store. Bethany and I built a comfortable home, put both our kids through college without loans, and finally, for the first time in my entire life, stopped counting every single dollar before it left our account. But I never stopped wearing work boots to job sites. I never traded flannel and jeans for suits the way Craig increasingly did as our client meetings grew more prestigious. I still showed up to every major project personally, still got my hands dirty walking a framing crew through a tricky detail, still looked like exactly what I was, a builder, not a businessman playing dress-up in a hard hat for photo opportunities. Craig started commenting on that more often as our company grew larger and our clients grew wealthier. Nothing cruel at first, just small observations dressed up as friendly advice during our drives to bigger client meetings. "You might want to consider a different look for the Whitmore presentation," he said once, glancing at my usual work clothes as we pulled into a parking lot outside a potential client's corporate headquarters. "First impressions matter more at this level, Russ. These aren't the same guys who hired you to fix a leaky pipe 20 years ago." I brushed it off most of the time. My work spoke for itself, and every client who mattered eventually learned that the man in the flannel shirt could read a blueprint better and manage a budget tighter than any polished executive they had worked with before. But the comments kept coming, small and steady, chipping quietly at something I never fully examined until much later. Around this same time, Bethany and I started discussing something we had quietly dreamed about for years, buying a genuine legacy property, something beyond a comfortable family home, an estate that would represent everything our decades of sacrifice had finally built. We started looking specifically at properties in the Indianapolis suburbs and eventually expanded our search toward a historic $8 million estate outside Carmel, Indiana. A sprawling 12-acre property with a main house built in the 1920s by a steel magnate, featuring original hand-carved woodwork that Bethany had fallen in love with from photos alone. We scheduled a viewing through the listing agent, a polished, sharp-dressed realtor named Vanessa Kirkland, who represented some of the most expensive properties in the entire Indianapolis metro area. I drove straight from a job site the morning of that appointment. Still in the same clothes I had worn framing a garage addition since 6 that morning, because Bethany's flight home from visiting her sister landed too late for me to swing by the house and change first. I had absolutely no idea that single decision, showing up exactly as I was about to expose something ugly that had been sitting quietly under the surface of my life for years. I arrived at the estate 15 minutes early, parking my pickup truck, the same battered work vehicle I had driven for 6 years despite being able to afford literally any car in the state, next to a row of luxury sedans already lined up in the circular driveway. Vanessa Kirkland stood in the marble entryway when I walked up, dressed in a tailored cream suit, her expression shifting the moment she registered exactly what was walking through the door. "Can I help you?" she said, her tone already carrying an edge of dismissal before I even opened my mouth. I introduced myself, explaining I had a scheduled viewing appointment for the property. Vanessa's eyebrows rose slightly, a small, practiced expression of polite disbelief that I had seen on plenty of faces throughout my life, though rarely delivered with quite this much confidence in a room this expensive. "I have a viewing scheduled with a Mr. Coates," she said, glancing down at a tablet in her hands. "This is an $8 million property, sir. I'm going to need to see some form of pre-approval documentation before I can walk you through a home at this price point. I hope you understand we can't simply let anyone tour a property like this." I told her calmly that I understood completely, and I explained that I was Russell Coates, that the appointment belonged to me and my wife. Vanessa's expression did not soften. If anything, it hardened further, her eyes moving over my work boots, my faded jeans, the drywall dust still clinging faintly to my forearms. "Sir, I really don't have time this afternoon to walk through a hypothetical," she said, her voice sharpening now, loud enough that a small group of other agents standing near the grand staircase glanced over toward us. "I have serious buyers scheduled today. If you're interested in touring the property, I'd suggest working with an agent more suited to properties in your actual price range. I don't say that to be unkind. I say it because I don't have time to waste on window shopping." The words landed exactly the way they were meant to land, sharp and dismissive, delivered in front of an audience specifically chosen to make sure I understood my place in that marble entryway. I felt something old and familiar rise up in my chest, the same feeling from a guidance counselor's office decades earlier, telling a 17-year-old boy to consider trade school instead of wasting time on real ambitions. I did not raise my voice. I have never once in my entire career found volume useful in a negotiation. I simply reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking application, scrolling to the escrow account documentation my financial team had prepared exactly for this appointment. A formal clearance letter confirming full available funds for the property's asking price, already reviewed and verified by the seller's own attorney the previous week. "This is the escrow balance clearance letter your seller's attorney already confirmed," I said, turning the screen toward her. "Full purchase price, verified funds, ready to close whenever you'd like to schedule it. I drove straight from a job site because my wife's flight landed late and we didn't want to reschedule a second time. I understand appearances matter in your business, Ms. Kirkland. I'd ask that you extend me the same courtesy you'd extend anyone else standing in this entryway." The color drained from Vanessa's face and then rushed back twice as fast, a deep, blotchy red spreading up her neck and across her cheeks as she stared at that screen. The small cluster of agents near the staircase had gone completely silent, several of them exchanging glances that made it clear they had witnessed the entire exchange from the beginning. "Mr. Coates, I apologize," Vanessa stammered, her polished composure cracking completely for the first time since I had walked through the door. "I had no idea. I assumed based on what I was wearing," I finished for her, keeping my voice level and calm despite the years of accumulated frustration sitting just beneath the surface of every word. "I've built a construction company from a pickup truck and $1,100 over 30 years, Ms. Kirkland. I've earned every dollar in that escrow account with my own two hands. I'd have thought a professional in your position would know better than to judge a buyer by his boots before checking his bank account." Bethany arrived moments later, having parked separately after picking up a rental car from the airport, and she read the tension in that entryway immediately, her eyes moving between my controlled anger and Vanessa's obvious mortification. I filled her in briefly, and I watched my wife's expression shift from confusion to a quiet, steady fury that reminded me exactly why I had married her 30 years earlier. We toured the property that afternoon regardless, Vanessa walking us through every room with an overcorrected, nervous formality that felt almost more uncomfortable than her earlier dismissal had been. Bethany fell even more in love with the estate in person than she had from photographs, particularly the original hand-carved library woodwork that had somehow survived nearly a century untouched. I made a decision standing in that library, one I did not fully explain to Bethany until we were back in the truck driving home. I decided I would still buy the property, because the house itself deserved to be judged on its own merit rather than punished for one realtor's poor judgment. But I also decided Vanessa Kirkland would never see a single dollar of commission from that sale, regardless of how the paperwork technically worked out. What I did not expect was for this story to spread through my own company within the week, or for my business partner of 15 years to react to it in a way that would end up hurting far worse than anything Vanessa Kirkland had said in that marble entryway. Word of the confrontation reached Craig Denton within days, mostly through a mutual business contact who had witnessed the exchange firsthand and thought it made for excellent conversation at a Chamber of Commerce dinner that weekend. Craig called me Monday morning, and I expected support, maybe even amusement at Vanessa's expense. What I got instead knocked the wind out of me in a way I did not see coming after 15 years of partnership. "Russ, I heard about the Kirkland thing," Craig said, his tone carrying an edge I had heard directed at other people before but never quite at me. "Look, I get that she was out of line, but you've got to understand, man, you kind of set yourself up for that. Showing up to an $8 million viewing looking like you just left a job site. What did you expect?" I sat in my truck outside a project site, phone pressed to my ear, feeling something shift permanently in how I understood my own business partner. "I expected to be treated with basic respect, Craig," I said. "The same respect I'd extend to anyone walking through that door, regardless of what they were wearing." "That's not how the real world works at that level, Russ," Craig continued, and I could hear real irritation building in his voice now, like he had been holding this particular opinion for a long time and finally found an opening to release it. "You've built something incredible here, genuinely incredible, but you still show up to 7-figure client meetings looking like you're about to frame a garage. I've told you this before. Image matters once you're operating at our level. Maybe it's time you actually listened." The conversation that followed peeled back years of small comments and subtle friction I had brushed aside because Craig closed deals, and I trusted the partnership more than I trusted my own occasional discomfort. He told me, in increasingly blunt terms, that several of our larger commercial clients had privately questioned whether Coates Construction's image matched the caliber of projects we were now bidding on, and that he had spent years quietly managing that perception gap without ever telling me directly. "You want the truth, Russ," he finally said, his voice tight with years of unspoken frustration. "Sometimes I've had to smooth things over after client meetings because you show up looking like hired labor instead of the owner of a 200-person company. I've never said anything because you build a hell of a building and clients respect that eventually. But don't act shocked that a realtor made an assumption plenty of people in our own client base have quietly made too." I did not respond right away. I sat in that truck for a long moment, staring through the windshield at a half-framed apartment complex my crew had been building for 8 months, a project worth $11 million that I had personally walked through every single week since groundbreaking, in the exact same boots and jeans Craig was now telling me embarrassed our company. 15 years, Craig," I finally said. 15 years, and you're telling me now over the phone that you've been ashamed of how I look while I've been building the thing that pays both our salaries." "That's not what I said," Craig shot back, though his tone told me it was closer to the truth than either of us wanted to admit out loud. I ended that call without agreeing on anything, and I spent the following weeks in a strange, unsettled place, questioning a partnership I had considered rock solid for a decade and a half. Bethany listened patiently as I worked through it at our kitchen table night after night, the same table where I once studied for my GED with my mother, the same table where I had negotiated our very first commercial contract with Walter Prout over 2 decades earlier. "You built this company being exactly who you are," she told me one night, her hand resting over mine. "Craig built his part of it playing a role that looked good in a boardroom. Those aren't the same thing, and you shouldn't let him convince you that his version is the only one that counts." I requested a formal partnership review meeting with Craig and our company's attorney 2 weeks later, not out of anger exactly, but out of a need to understand precisely where our 15-year partnership actually stood beneath the surface politeness we had maintained through most of our disagreements. That meeting confirmed something I had suspected but never fully allowed myself to face. Craig had been quietly steering larger client relationships toward himself for the better part of 3 years, gradually positioning himself as the public face of Coates Construction, in exactly the settings where my work boots apparently embarrassed him, while directing me toward field operations where, in his own words during that meeting, my particular strengths were better suited. He had, without ever discussing it openly with me, been slowly rewriting the actual balance of our partnership to match his own comfort level, rather than the equal foundation we originally built the company on. The partnership review meeting forced a conversation Craig and I should have had years earlier, one neither of us particularly wanted to have even then. Sitting across from him with our attorney present, I laid out exactly what I had pieced together: the client meetings he increasingly handled alone, the subtle repositioning of my role within our own company, the years of small comments that I now understood were not friendly advice, but a slow campaign to reshape Coates Construction into something that matched Craig's comfort rather than the honest, hands-on company I had actually built. Craig did not deny most of it once the pattern sat laid out plainly in front of him. He admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that he had grown genuinely embarrassed representing a company whose owner still looked, in his words, like the help at high-level client meetings, and that he had convinced himself managing that image quietly, without confronting me directly, was protecting the business rather than undermining our partnership. "I never wanted to make you feel small, Russ," he said, and for the first time in that meeting, some of his usual polish cracked into something that sounded genuinely regretful. "I just always felt like our biggest clients needed to see something more polished representing the company, and somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing that as managing perception and started actually believing it myself." I told him plainly that a company built on my 30 years of honest, hands-on work did not need a polished mask to represent it, and that if our biggest clients could not respect the actual builder standing behind every project we delivered, they were not clients worth chasing in the first place. We spent that meeting and several more over the following month restructuring our partnership agreement, ultimately deciding, mutually, and without the bitterness that could have easily defined it, to separate our roles more clearly. Craig took over a newly formed development and acquisitions division, while I retained full control over Coates Construction's core building operations, the actual work that had built our reputation from a single pickup truck 30 years earlier. It was not a clean, dramatic breakup. It was something more honest than that. Two men who had built something real together finally admitting they had been quietly pulling in different directions for years, and choosing to separate those directions cleanly rather than let resentment keep building underneath a partnership neither of us fully trusted anymore. Vanessa Kirkland, for her part, reached out personally about 3 weeks after our confrontation, requesting a meeting I almost declined before Bethany convinced me to hear her out. She arrived at my office in far more modest attire than the tailored cream suit from that first meeting, and she apologized without excuses, explaining that a company culture built entirely around appearance and quick judgment had shaped her instincts in ways she had never fully examined until watching her own face turn red on that marble floor. "I've thought about that afternoon almost every day since," she told me. "I built an entire career assuming I could read people accurately within 5 seconds of meeting them. You proved me completely wrong, and honestly, Mr. Coates, I needed that more than I wanted to admit." I did not restore her commission on the estate sale, a decision I stood by completely. But I did agree to let her handle a smaller commercial listing for Coates Construction the following year, giving her a genuine chance to earn back trust through actual work rather than assumptions, which she did, professionally and without a single misstep. Bethany and I closed on that $8 million estate outside Carmel 2 months after our first viewing, and we moved in that following spring. I still wear my work boots to every job site Coates Construction manages, and I still show up covered in the occasional layer of drywall dust when a project needs my direct attention, because that is exactly who built this life from nothing, and I refuse to let one realtor's snap judgment or one longtime partner's quiet embarrassment convince me to become someone else at 52 years old. Thank you so much for staying with me through this story. If it made you think about your own life, about the times people judged you before they ever bothered to know you, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me what stood out to you most, or share your own story if this one hit close to home. If you are new here, please subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming. Stories about respect, patience, and the quiet strength it takes to stay exactly who you are once you finally have every reason in the world to change. I will see you in the next one.